Hello and welcome back to another episode of Coffee Wednesday. We are back again in our little studio, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. And this all is going to relate back to the theme of doing things imperfectly. So the next phase of this channel is a lot of experimentation. A lot of experimentation of basically getting comfortable with sucking at something I haven't done before. So today's attempt is no different. Today we are actually going to kick off a whole new segment on this channel called Email Support. I know that's a really boring name. We have to workshop that a little bit later, but it corresponded to the email address that I had in mind for this segment. So now I would encourage you guys to send me emails so that I can address them on this channel, so I know what you guys are thinking about and what you guys are looking for, so I can kind of modify the show according to some of the questions that you guys have. And this entire project was essentially conceived when I got this email from one of my subscribers recently named Cade. So Cade has been a pretty active member of this channel. He left a bunch of comments on a bunch of my videos, and one of them got quite a bit of traction, maybe 2-3 videos ago, where he asked about this phenomenon where you think to yourself, I need to get the most out of a book, so you don't even start. So it's the classic paralysis by analysis problem. But he also on top of that, asked a bunch of really, really interesting questions that I think I'm qualified to answer. And I'm going to do my best to give something of value to Cade here. So we're going to record this whole thing as this week's email support. And then again, if you want to send me an email so we can keep this segment going, we're going to call this email support. So email me your questions over to support@amugofinsights.org. That is support@amugofinsights.org. And hopefully I'll get to them, and I will hopefully dedicate an entire episode to you and your questions. So here's Cade asking me this very insightful question. Hi Robin, my name is Cade. I'm 18 and a senior in high school. I've been a pretty active commenter on your channel. I'm the one who asked for a video on getting over the hump of trying to get the most out of a book. I'm looking forward to seeing that video, but I wanted to reach out to ask you some of my own personal questions. Heading into senior year, I have some pretty heavy reading to do. Dante, Milton, Homer, and some other reading in economics and psychology. I obviously want to get the most out of these books, learn them, love them, but having been through the gauntlet before, I know what's coming, if you know what I mean. Having done your degree in literature, knowing the stresses of trying to have the perfect reading routine in college, do you have any recommendations for me on learning from these great works while still, be a human being? Closely related to that, and much more important to me personally, I am trying to develop my own process for understanding, retaining, and absorbing what I read. I'm heavily interested in pursuing things like politics, policy, and philosophy in college, which means I'm trying to read widely and read often. Yet, I haven't finished a book apart from high school for 2 years. Part of that is what I described above. The other part is that I spent so much time trying to find a perfect way to read, I never read. I've tried to develop all the different ways to read Adler's 4 levels. My attempt at note-taking has been a horribly inconsistent commonplace book, and being so pressed for time, I'm not getting the nutrients out of a book that I want to. Do you have any thoughts? I apologize for the length. Any help or thoughts would be greatly appreciated. God bless, Cade Sharp. Anyway, before we start here, Cade, I don't mind the length at all. In fact, the longer the email, the more I'm just getting the sense that you've thought a lot about this question, which is actually really good to see. And also, reading this email is kind of like deja vu for me, because when I was 18, kind of struggling through all my class readings, I had these exact same thoughts, and I'd like to answer all of these questions in 2 parts. So this email can be broken up into 2 parts. First part essentially tries to ask, how do you organize your class readings in high school or in college so that you would also have time to, go get in trouble, go to your campus pub for a good time? And most importantly, I think alongside college learning, one of the mistakes that I made in high school was that I put too much time into studying for my classes. Of course, I had creative projects on the side. I started this channel in high school, so I had certain things on the side. But one mistake that I definitely did make was that I spent way too much time working on schoolwork at the expense of getting into relationships, at the expense of really understanding what it takes to cook well, for example, really understanding what my hobbies are, so that by the time I graduated from high school, that was quite a point of crisis because all your validations all kind of linked up or bunched up with the validation that you get from getting good grades. So there's this inherent conflict between what you want to do in high school versus what the curriculum demands you to do. So essentially the first part of this question wants to ask, how do I still be a kid, or how do I still be a high school student and of course early college student, have all the fun, experience life, but while at the same time kind of tackle all the reading material that I need to get done? Because unlike STEM subjects where you can kind of cram a bunch of stuff, in literature there is no cramming. If you don't understand certain parts of a novel, you can't write an essay on it. I don't care what you say about ChatGPT writing. I don't think that's the point of a literature degree. If you're using ChatGPT to get through a literature degree, you shouldn't be watching this video because that's not the point of the degree. The degree is actually to embrace the difficulty of thinking and writing. It's not just to churning a clever response. Having said that, there are some tricks that I used, or there are some kind of strategies that I employed to make sure that I have time for myself and for doing dumb and fun things in college and high school, while at the same time being a really diligent student of literature. So anyway, so the strategy that I would recommend is, given that you're going through a K-12 education, your curriculum compared to college is a lot more defined, is a lot more structured. You have basically thousands of people, or, sometimes even hundreds of thousands of people going through the same curriculum. So you're going to have set points of criteria. There's a criteria on your assessment sheet that's pretty clearly defined. So instead of asking a question of how do I just with my own will get through all this reading material, I would actually encourage you to read the assessment sheet, the criteria sheet, and your learning objectives very carefully. Because this kind of goes contrary to everything I said before, but hear me out here. There's a second part, there's a twist to this answer. Essentially, you want to engineer or reverse engineer all your reading program according to the assessment sheet. Because the assessment sheet is the best place for you to figure out what you need to get done, what points that you need to hit to get rewarded for this essay that you're writing. Because for a lot of clever people, they just kind of think that I'm going to disregard this entire criteria sheet, I'm going to disregard assessments, and then they get a bad grade and they get angry at the institution, right? That was kind of like me when I first started studying literature. It was just like, I don't understand. But the hack here is actually to reverse engineer your reading according to the assessment sheet, so that as you're digging through these complicated books like Dante, Milton, and Homer, I can, if this is a word of assurance, no one has a fucking clue. Not even some college professors. I was a part of a reading group. We get together every Monday to read Milton. Even they don't really have like a clear sense of what the hell the poem is about. This is an ever-evolving project, right? Interpreting literature is an ever-evolving project. You never really get to some fundamental truth or a fundamental interpretation of a piece of work. And that's where the fun of the discipline lies. But that kind of thinking isn't really what you're doing in high school. In high school, there are clear expectations, which is kind of why I kind of dislike high school classes on literature. It discourages you from thinking that literature is this pluralistic and this freedom to interpret things however you want. So it's really frustrating to do it that way. So what I would recommend is reverse engineer your reading program. Use your assessment sheets as a guide for you to go through all these really dense pieces of literature. And what you're going to find is that if you employ the strategy strategically, if you find out exactly the parts that are going to hit these points in your assessment, if you just cover enough ground for your exam, if you be very smart about it, schedule your reading in deep reading blocks instead of just chopping up your reading way too much, get them done as soon as possible, and just kind of hit the points as soon as possible. In exchange, you get a lot more free time. In exchange, you get a lot more free time to pursue your own projects, to pursue your own little interests and curiosities. Because here's the thing, you can read Dante, Milton, and Homer in high school. You can read all these things, but schools have this magical property where the minute the book is an assigned piece of reading, you start to hate it. The minute you start, even like if you get assigned a book that you really like, the added pressure of having to perform on an exam on this novel automatically reduces your reading pleasure by 80%. So a smarter way to approach this is actually to find out what parts of this book is going to be assessed and which books are going to be assessed. Reverse engineer your reading, and then use all that free time that you've just squeezed out from your study schedule to pursue extracurricular reading. A very old video was titled The Rogue Academic, right? You kind of have to go rogue a little bit here. So do what you can to hit all the points, to get the score that you need to go, that you need to go to a good college, and basically use all that free time to supplement your class readings. Because what you're going to find there in your free time, all the stuff that you read on the side, alongside all the fun things you're going to do, is that they are all going to connect back to your school performance in some way. So you're still getting a more holistic education. You're just not operating within the confines of the institution. So get what the institution needs done with maximum efficiency. Use like time blocking, use whatever study strategies that you want to use to compress as much study time as you can, and use the rest of your time to explore these corners. Back when I was studying the French Revolution in high school, I would basically just reselect chapters from my textbook, which was super boring to read. But then I would buy dozens of other books on the French Revolution, and those books are so much more well written. Those books are so much more interesting that they eventually fed back into my final exams, or fed back into my final essays, and I ended up with a really good grade because of my extracurricular kind of curiosity fed into my natural desire to learn. So you're kind of operating beyond the confines while yet still hitting all the points and checkers you need. So long story short, reverse engineer your reading program according to your assessment sheets or your criteria sheets. Use your criteria sheets to guide your reading. Compress your study time as much as possible so you can use all your free time to really do all the readings that you want to do. What you're going to find there is that books outside of your school are much more interesting to read. They're written by people for the general public. They don't have that stuffy air about them. So use that extra reading to supplement your high school assessments and exams. And I promise you're going to have a lot more fun doing it that way. So the second part is basically talking about getting over the hump of trying to get so much out of a book that you don't even start. And then there's a little question here about note-taking as well. And I'm really excited to answer this part of the question. So essentially, I really like the analogy here where you said, I'm not getting the nutrients out of a book that I want to. So by nutrients kind of comes with a bag of meaning, right? So when you think of nutrients, you wouldn't exactly expect a supplement or a vitamin B, for example. You wouldn't expect that nutrient to instantaneously work on you. Right? You're not taking an antibiotic. You're not taking some sort of strong medicine that's going to leave your immune system all fucked up for weeks. So in a sense, if you're trying to get the most out of a book way too fast, if you try to employ some of the techniques that I've taught you, you're kind of expecting this piece of nutrient for your brain to function like an antibiotic. You're expecting it to work within a week where you can just suck up and vacuum up all the stuff that you need from a book straight away, instead of engaging in what I would call even more long-term sustainable reading. And long-term sustainable reading means you tackle it like nutrients. You take it and you observe the changes in your life very gradually. You read what you can right now so that you can start to get started with this entire process of allowing a book to slowly unfold. That means sometimes for a very difficult book, you wouldn't read beyond 5 pages a day, because you can't take any more. Those gummy bears that we used to have? They look like little jellies, but they're actually like multivitamin. So I used to have this horrible habit of like chugging down a whole bottle without realizing that like they're supposed to make you sick because they're nutrients. Same thing is happening here. If you ingest too much of anything, even the best vitamins are going to give your brain that like cranky feeling. They're going to fuck up your entire immune system. So a better way to approach it is piecemeal whatever it is that you're trying to read, and don't be perfect with it. There's no way that you'll be able to get the most out of anything. Even with any reading techniques that I've taught on this channel, reading is still a long-term, a very contemplative pursuit, and one thing that it requires is time. And Cade, given the fact that you're 18, you have a lot of time. And in fact, something that I've experienced recently, racing to my mid-20s here, is that certain books that I thought made perfect sense to me when I was in high school, I actually realized they didn't make much sense to me at all. So with time, you also get the added perspective of your extra brain space. So your prefrontal cortex really starts to develop when you race towards your mid-20s. And eventually, you're able to read these books with so much more depth and so much more understanding. So expect yourself to, get everything so you can be done with it. It's kind of antithetical to the enjoyment of reading. Instead, you want to just get whatever you can on your first reading and allow these pieces of nutrients to slowly work their way into your life, and to observe how this book is impacting your life on a daily basis, to observe the environmental effects that this book is having on you. Maybe a certain part of your reality starts to look a bit different because you considered a different idea. Or maybe if you read extensively about politics, things that are happening in the news are going to appear kind of different. So note down these subtle changes. And that brings me to note-taking. I wouldn't worry about developing a comprehensive system. And this is kind of why I'm doing these longer shows now, to give you guys extra context, because what I realized that I was doing before is just I give out gimmicks and people just kind of assume that these are gimmicks that are going to make people fantastic readers. There is actually no point for you right now, Cade, to develop a comprehensive system. What you need instead is a resonance journal. A resonance journal is an idea by Cal Newport. So essentially, you're still in the stage of collecting things. You're still in the stage where you're kind of figuring out what you want to read. You're still coming up with that TBR of your life, where you have certain ambitious titles that you want to tackle throughout your life. You're still in the collection phase. And I feel like now, most of the time, I'm still in that collection phase. I have no idea what I would prefer to read maybe 10 years down the road. So keep a resonance journal. And what do you put in this resonance journal? Whenever a quote from a book, or whenever an idea from a YouTube video, or whenever a moment in a film resonates with you, you write it down and make a brief note. And that's all your note-taking. Like, just leave it at that. Don't worry about all this and topical stuff that we talked about. That comes much later. It's going to make a lot more sense to you in college, where you do have to come up with one of these systems. But for now, since you're in the exploration phase, pre-college, find what resonates with you. And not just beyond books. Notice certain moments in your life and note them down as little nuggets. And at the end of the month, summarize all these nuggets down to a list of things that you deeply value. What's going to happen is this list eventually is going to guide you towards all the right books that you're going to love reading, like we talked about in the last episode. This resonance journal is going to guide you towards those books that are going to give you shifts of reality later on. And then when you're ready, when you've accumulated enough life experience to match your experience with these new incoming pieces of information and theory, that's when reading starts to, breathe magic into your life. It's not just like you're accumulating all this information, right? Eventually that information will bleed out into your life. Eventually, the way you relate to the world will be completely different. Eventually, the way you relate to other people will be completely different. And eventually, the way that you look at yourself is going to be completely different. That's the magic of education. So for now, still in the exploration phase, note-taking, just take the pressure off of yourself. You're not supposed to understand everything on the first try. So don't even bother with developing a comprehensive system, because your system's going to change over time. But for now, focus on resonance. What resonates with you? Develop a very strong inner compass, and that compass will lead you to the right system eventually. Maybe you would even disagree with my whole system of gathering ideas in a syntopicon. Maybe you wouldn't even agree with me, but that's kind of the point. You need to find out what works for you, and the first step towards doing that is to note down points of resonance. From a book, collect a quote here and there. And from a movie, collect a movie line here and there. And moments in your life, and find where it resonates. And eventually, you'll be able to use these points of resonance to develop your map of reading, to develop your interest areas in life. And this is only going to get more and more specific down the line. And that is the spirit of exploration. And that's what's actually going to make gathering ideas from books fun. So, fun is the main point. Just a quick recap here. How to be a human being in high school under a very, very stressful course load. Compress your study time. Use the rest of your free time to explore. whatever it is that you want to read. And second part, how do you get over the hump? Treat reading as nutrients. They're not going to make sense straight away, and it's okay not to get everything out of books straight away. The one thing that is going to stop you is not reading at all. So you rather read something, get something out of it, let the nutrients percolate through you over time instead of just like get paralyzed by this entire process. And number 3, keep a resonance journal as you're exploring new titles to read instead of worrying about some grand system straight away. Those are the pieces of advice that I would give to Cade's email. Then again, thank you so much, Cade, for this email. And it's been so fun to tailor an episode to one of these email questions. So I welcome all the emails. Send me an email down below, support@amugofinsights.org, support@amugofinsights.org. And I look forward to seeing more questions. And I'll see you here next week with more on Coffee Wednesday. Take care and goodbye.